For most of human history, who you were was decided the moment you were born. Your tribe, your bloodline, the patch of earth your ancestors had always worked. There was no membership to apply for, no status that could be granted or taken away. You belonged to a family, a clan, a people, and that belonging was as fixed as the stars overhead. Then, in a handful of Greek towns 25 centuries ago, something strange began to take shape. People started to imagine that belonging could be a legal status rather than an accident of birth, that a stranger might be made into one of us, and that being one of us was something a person could hold, prove, and carry. How did humanity turn the raw fact of where you happened to be born into the invented idea we now call citizenship? The story begins in the Greek polis, the small self-governing city that treated its members not as the property of a ruler, but as its constituent parts. Around 508 BC, an Athenian reformer named Cleisthenes did something quietly radical. He reorganized the population of Athens by where people lived rather than who their ancestors were, sorting citizens into local units called demes and grouping those demes into 10 new tribes. The point was to shatter the old loyalties of blood and clan and replace them with a shared identity as Athenians. To be a citizen now meant to be registered in your deme, and with that registration came the right to stand in the assembly on the hill called the Pnyx and vote on the fate of the city. The philosopher Aristotle would later define the citizen precisely, not as someone who simply lived in a place, but as someone who shared in judging and in ruling. When an Athenian boy turned 18, he was presented to the men of his deme, who voted on whether he was truly the son of citizens and old enough to join them. Citizenship was not a document. It was participation, witnessed by your neighbors, but the Greek model carried a flaw that would eventually doom it. It was jealously small. Athenian citizenship was a closed circle that excluded women, enslaved people, and the many foreigners who lived and traded in the city. And it could not easily be widened without diluting the privilege of those who already held it. Rome solved the problem the Greeks could not. The Romans treated citizenship, their civitas, as something that could expand, a status granted to conquered peoples, freed slaves, and loyal allies as a tool of integration. And Roman citizenship was a shield. There is a famous moment recorded in the New Testament when the Apostle Paul, about to be flogged, stops the soldiers with 4 words, civis, Romanus sum. I am a Roman citizen. It was illegal to scourge a citizen without trial, and those words alone could halt the lash. For centuries, this status remained a prize. Then, in the year 212, the Emperor Caracalla issued an edict extending Roman citizenship to nearly every free inhabitant of the empire in a single stroke. Historians have long suspected a practical motive, since citizens paid certain taxes that non-citizens did not. In one decree, the exclusive privilege of Rome became an almost universal status, and the meaning of the word began to change. When the Western Roman Empire dissolved, so too did its abstract idea of the citizen. Across medieval Europe, the elaborate legal status faded back into something older and more personal. You were no longer a citizen of a state, but a subject of a lord, bound by oaths of allegiance and personal obligation, tied to the land and the man who held it. Yet the idea did not die. It survived and revived inside the walls of the medieval town. As trade grew, cities won charters that made their inhabitants something more than serfs. In the German lands, a powerful principle took hold, captured in the saying that town air makes you free. A runaway serf who managed to live within a chartered city for a year and a day could shed his bondage and become a burgher, a free townsman with rights the surrounding countryside did not offer. From that word for the fortified town, the burg, we still draw the word bourgeois. Meanwhile, in 1215, English barons forced their king to seal the Magna Carta, establishing the startling idea that even a sovereign was bound by law and owed his free men certain protections. Membership was slowly becoming a bond in 2 directions again, a relationship of mutual obligation rather than mere submission. Then, in the summer of 1789, everything changed. As revolution swept France, its National Assembly proclaimed the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. The old word for a person under the crown had been sujet, subject, one who submits. The revolutionaries replaced it with citoyen, citizen, and they meant it as a weapon. Drawing on the pamphleteer Abbé Zilles, who had asked what the common people of the Third Estate truly were, and answered that they were the nation itself. The Declaration reframed citizenship as a bundle of rights held against the state, rather than duties owed upward to a king. For a time, French revolutionaries even addressed one another simply as citizen, dropping the titles of rank. Yet the new ideal revealed its own boundaries almost at once. The rights of the citizen were extended to men, and when the writer Olympe de Gouges published a declaration of the rights of woman insisting that women too were citizens, she was sent to the guillotine in 1793. Citizenship had become a language of liberation, but it still had walls. The next great question was brutally simple: who counts? In the United States, that question collided with slavery. In 1857, in the Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court had ruled that people of African descent could not be citizens at all, that they held no rights the government was bound to respect. It took a civil war to overturn those words. In 1868, the 14th Amendment to the American Constitution answered the court with a single sweeping sentence, declaring that all persons born or naturalized in the United States were citizens of the nation and of the state where they lived. This was the principle of birthright citizenship, the idea that the soil of your birth, not the standing of your parents, made you a member. Citizenship was now something a constitution could guarantee, and no court could quietly strip away on the grounds of race. But the 20th century exposed the terrible flaw hidden inside the whole magnificent idea. If rights belonged to citizens, what happened to a person who belonged to no state at all? The collapse of empires after the First World War left millions of refugees stranded without a country, and in 1922, the world invented a partial remedy, a travel document for the stateless known as the Nansen Passport, named for the explorer who championed it. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, herself a refugee who had lost her nationality, watched the stateless discover a horrifying truth. Stripped of citizenship, they found that abstract human rights protected no one because there was no state obligated to enforce them. What every human being truly needed, she wrote, was the right to have rights. The right to belong somewhere at all. In answer, the world tried to build a floor beneath everyone. In 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights proclaimed that everyone has the right to a nationality, and in 1961, a dedicated convention set out to reduce statelessness across the earth. The small booklet in your pocket, the passport, had become the modern token of that belonging, portable proof that some state in the world claims you as its own. And so we return to where we began, to the strange journey from the accident of birth to the invented status of the citizen. We built citizenship over 25 centuries precisely to escape the tyranny of blood, to make belonging something granted, guaranteed, and shared rather than merely inherited. And yet consider the passport in your drawer. The one you hold, assigned to you by the pure chance of where you were born, still shapes where you may travel, where you may work, and how safely you may live, more powerfully than almost any choice you will ever make. We spent thousands of years turning the accident of birth into a matter of law. The unsettling question is whether, in the end, we ever truly escaped the accident of birth at all, or simply gave it papers. If you have found this journey through the architecture of order worth taking, consider subscribing and tell us which cornerstone of civilization we should trace next. Cast your vote for the next Architecture of Order episode, and we will follow another invented idea back to its beginning.